or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
On the second day of the ICJ's hearings, Algeria called on the Israeli occupation to grant humanitarian access to UNRWA in the occupied Palestinian territories where the situation is disastrous, particularly in Gaza. Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Ben Jama, has said Sahrawi refugees who were forcibly displaced from their land by the Moroccan occupier need a lasting solution that will enable the exercise their right to self-determination. And French left-wing parties have accused Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau of stirring up hatred against Muslims protesting against his double standards. And those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. I'm Asia Bakar. Good afternoon. The minister delegate to the Minister of National Defense and Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, Army General Said Shangriha, has stressed the need to combat false and destructive propaganda and to strengthen individual and collective security awareness. Miriam Barshi has the details.
In an address made via video conference to the personnel of the 4th Military Region during his working visit to the southern wilaya of Welgara, the Army General stressed the need to counter the dangerous spread of destructive and misleading propaganda, especially with the rapid changes in communication technologies and social media.
The necessity of countering the dangerous use of destructive and misleading propaganda must be emphasized in light of the tremendous development of communication technologies, social media and digital platforms. Fake news and information manipulation have become lethal weapons used to achieve dubious political goals. Therefore, it is important to strengthen the security awareness among individuals and groups and promote a solid national media culture by encouraging them to check and verify the credibility of information through consulting credible sources before validating or sharing it, and to not be misled by sensational headlines and misleading content.
Mr. Shangriha affirmed that all devoted Algerians must resist biased campaigns targeting Algeria's image through critical thinking, awareness and patriotism, while working to thwart threats posed to the country's security and unity. The Army Chief of Staff listened to the concerns of the personnel, who reaffirmed their dedication to securing borders and protecting the nation. On the occasion, he praised the facility personnel for their professionalism and for the quality of the services they provide.
The chairman and CEO of the Sonatrach Group, Rashid Hashishi, has received the CEO of the Spanish company Naturgy, Francisco Reines. This meeting, held at the Sonatrach's headquarters in the presence of senior executives from both sides, provided an opportunity to examine ways and means to strengthen cooperation between Sonatrach and Naturgy in the field of gas marketing. The two sides also exchanged views on the evolution of global hydrocarbon markets in light of the changes taking place on the international energy scene. Mr. Reines emphasized on this occasion that his company is proud of the historic and privileged relationship it maintains with the Sonatrach Group, affirming that Naturgy is willing to strengthen and expand the areas of cooperation with its Algerian partner through the development of new projects in the oil and gas industry and renewable energies in the best interests of both parties. The fourth and final regional meeting of journalists and media professionals has wound up with a series of recommendations in which the participants called for strengthening the media training system by adapting to ongoing digital transformations. Ms. Shafi has the details.
At the end of the meeting organized by the Ministry of Communication, the participants recommended modernizing academic programs and strengthening continuing education for journalists in the field of artificial intelligence and data analysis. They called for encouraging investment in digital infrastructure and achieving digital media sovereignty through the creation of national applications and departments responsible for verifying information and combating fake news. They also called for accelerating the activation of High Council Council of Journalism, Ethics and Professional Conduct, and facilitating the journalists' access to information through the establishment of an electronic platform provided with a database. Emphasis was placed on the importance of developing a unified national strategy involving various media companies with the establishment of a national body responsible for monitoring its implementation. The Minister of Communication, Mohammed Mizian, said the recommendations set lay the foundation for a constructive dialogue.
The recommendations were realistic and they laid the foundation for a constructive dialogue. I will submit these recommendations faithfully to the President of the Republic, and he has a long-term vision to take the right decision in the near future, especially that we are about to celebrate on May 3rd the World Press Freedom Day.
Let's note that the 4th Regional Meeting of Journalists and Media Professionals was marked by the organization of 4 workshops devoted to the new legal framework governing the sector and the ethic of the profession, the state of the audiovisual media and written electronic press in the era of artificial intelligence and 5G, the role of institutional communication in promoting the image of Algeria, as well as the specialized and continuing training for the new professionals.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and French left-wing parties have accused Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau of stirring up hatred against Muslims protesting against his double standards. Sajama Salmani again.
This came in the wake of the murder of a young Muslim man in a mosque in the Gard department in southern France by a Frenchman. The brutal murder of Abu Bakr Cissé in a mosque in the Gard department last Friday by a Frenchman who stabbed him with dozens of wounds has sparked outrage within France's Muslim community, as well as among left-wing parties, organizations and human rights groups. The leader of the La France Insoumise left-wing party, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, has criticized the Interior Minister's stance in recent months, accusing him of fostering an Islamophobic climate in the country. He declared during a rally staged against Islamophobia that those who utter words without understanding their meaning should be held responsible. The party's top official was referring to Bruno Retailleau's statement at a rally for the Republic and against Islamism held in Paris. The minister defended the ban on the Muslim headscarf in sport, saying, "Long live sport, and therefore down with the veil." The party said Retailleau's statement and behavior against Muslims in France contribute to fostering an outrageous climate where people allow themselves to attack a person based on their religious affiliation.
And the LFI MP Aurélie Trouvé, for her part, affirmed that Islamophobia kills, it must be said, and political leaders are responsible for this, as she put it. The leader of the Green Party, Marine Tondelier, said Islamophobia is in so many media and political circles endangers the lives of Muslims. Meanwhile, Bruno Retailleau's timid response to the murder of the young Muslim man was sharply criticized by the French political class and by associations which denounced the policy of double standards. MP Thomas Porte said all lives do not have the same value for the Minister of Interior, who preferred to attend Pope Francis' funeral on Saturday. The president of the SOS Racisme Association, Dominique Sopo, deplored the deafening silence of the Minister of Interior. And now to the Middle East, as the humanitarian situation continued to worsen. About 40 Palestinians have been killed in new airstrikes carried out by the Israeli army against various parts of the Gaza Strip. Several others were wounded in the Israeli attacks that targeted the northern town of Jabalia, the northwestern area of Gaza, as well as Khan Yunis in the southern part of the enclave. This came as UN agencies and humanitarian organizations urged the Israeli occupying authorities to allow in aid, raising concern about risks of famine. In this connection, Malaysia affirmed that the restrictions imposed to UN agencies, and more particularly UNRWA, was part of a policy aimed at forcibly displacing the Palestinians from their land. And public hearings for an advisory opinion on Israel's obligations toward the United Nations and its agencies and bodies in the occupied Palestinian territories have continued for the second day in The Hague. Algeria called on the Israeli occupation to grant humanitarian access to UNRWA in the occupied Palestinian territories, where the situation is disastrous, particularly in Gaza, one of the worst humanitarian situations of our generation. On the second day, the expert on human rights issued and Vice President of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Maya Sahli Fadel, said that Algeria considers that the Zionist entity as an occupying power is obliged to grant humanitarian access to UNRWA and to do everything possible to facilitate its humanitarian activities in the occupied Palestinian territories.
Depuis le 2 mars 2025.
Since the 2nd of March 2025, a deliberate blockade that has been decided by the Israeli occupying power has prevented the delivery of any food aid to Gaza. Due to this, the Palestinian population is facing hunger, lacking in livelihood and basic necessities. As the General Commissioner of UNRWA pointed out, he said that he was witnessing a man-made, politically motivated famine. The recent massacre of 15 paramedics and ambulance drivers who were Palestinians and whose bodies were found in a mass grave sparked worldwide indignation, without mentioning the numerous attacks perpetrated against women and children in the occupied Palestinian territory. Algeria recalls that the desperate situation in Gaza and the blockade of humanitarian aid are being used today as bargaining chips and weapons of war.
The chief of South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation has kicked off the second day of hearings at the ICJ. He said that under the world's watchful eye, Palestinians are being subjected to atrocity, crimes, persecution, apartheid, and genocide. He said the UN and UNRWA is one of the latest casualties of the Israeli occupation.
Israel continues to act with impunity as it does enjoy some form of exceptionalism from accountability to international law and norms. Conversely, any person or entity which seeks to hold Israel to account for its inhumane and unlawful actions is subjected to countermeasures and censure. The United Nations and this court has not been spared. In this context, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, which was established after the 1948 Nakba, is but one of Israel's latest casualties. UNRWA is being attacked in furtherance of Israel's goal to deny the inalienable right of return of Palestinian refugees, the restitution of their land, homes, and property appropriated since 1948, and to further its apartheid policies and practices. The attacks on UNRWA are also deliberately imperiling the existence of Palestinians as a group.
That was the statement of the chief of South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Sain Dangor. And now, Algeria's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ammar Benjama, has said in New York that the Sahrawi refugees who were forcibly displaced from their land by the Moroccan occupier need a lasting solution that will enable them to exercise their right to self-determination. The details in this report with Jamal Salmani.
In his address to a Security Council meeting held on migration and refugees, Mr. Benjama recalled that Algeria has been hosting Sahrawi refugees in the Tindouf camps for more than half a century after having been forcibly displaced from their lands by Morocco.
Throughout this period, 50 years, despite huge challenges, Algeria, in cooperation with UN agencies and humanitarian partners, has consistently ensured access to basic services for Sahrawi refugees. However, a durable solution is needed. This must include enabling Sahrawi refugees to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination through a free and fair referendum, as enshrined in international law and UN resolution. The decision about the future of the Sahrawi refugees is and must always rests with them. The rights of the Sahrawi refugees are inalienable. They cannot be, they must not be compromised or subjected to transactions under any circumstances.
In general terms, Algeria's permanent representative to the UN warned against the displacement crisis, which is worsening year by year.
The number of displaced persons is rising systematically due to multiple, often overlapping causes, in particular armed conflicts. This alarming increase has occurred in parallel with the decline of international funding, leaving millions of vulnerable individuals without access to life-saving assistance. This situation is unacceptable and reflects a broader failure to meet the needs of displaced population. Regrettably, both refugees and host communities often feel abandoned in this human endeavor.
Mr. bin Jama said that the global refugee crisis requires urgent, coordinated and sustained actions, including ensuring the protection of refugees.
And that was the statement of Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar bin Jama. And now, with 123 million people being forcibly displaced around the world, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, made a passionate appeal to the UN security, calling for a diplomatic surge to tackle the crisis. At the meeting of the UN Security Council of Refugees, Mr. Grandi recorded that the mandate of the Security Council is to prevent and stop war, maintain peace and security.
This is a season of war. This is a time of crisis. From Sudan to Ukraine, from the Sahel to Myanmar, from the Democratic Republic of Congo to Haiti, violence has become the defining currency of our age. Preventing and stopping war, upholding peace and security, this is the Security Council's mandate. This is your primary responsibility, and one that, you will forgive me for again saying it, this body has chronically failed to live up to. But please, do not resign yourselves to the defeat of diplomacy. I speak to you today once more on behalf of the 123 million people forcibly displaced, who are among the first victims of wars, and in many ways the most visible symptom of conflict and persecution.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and Mr. Grandi warned that the conflict in Sudan could spread if political solutions were not found quickly. He noted that there are already more than 200,000 Sudanese in Libya today, many of whom could migrate to Europe. In Syria, where the recent return of internally displaced persons and refugees offers a sign of hope, Mr. Grandi said that this process will depend on international political will, including the easing of sanctions, support for reconstruction investment, as well as a continued humanitarian aid. And now the Algerian flag has been raised at the headquarters of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, after Algeria won a seat on this continental body for a 3-year term. Miriam Barshi.
Algeria's ambassador to Ethiopia, Mohamed Khalid, stressed that this election to the Peace and Security Council, PSC, is a recognition by African countries of the effective and decisive role played by the Algerian diplomacy.
This election represents a prominent recognition by the brotherly African countries of the active, important and understanding role of the Algerian diplomacy in promoting the values of peace and fostering consultations among countries to found solutions to the crises facing our continent, in accordance with the guidelines of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, which have enabled Algeria to regain its true standing at the continental level.
He added that Algeria will begin its term of office in this council, an essential pillar of the peace and security architecture in Africa, in a continental and international geopolitical context that requires the combined efforts of all council members to find lasting solutions to the conflicts, wars and problems facing several African countries. The AU Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Mr. Bankole Adeoye, and the permanent representative of Uganda to the AU, whose country is chairing the Peace and Security Council for the month of April, Mrs. Rebecca Otenga, welcome and wished Algeria every success. Mrs. Otenga hailed Algeria's contribution to promoting peace and security in Africa.
The People's Democratic Republic of Algeria is not new to the issues of peace and security on our continent, having itself made a substantive contribution in this field for the cause of stability of our continent right from the early days when we were struggling for independence. It would be reminded of us that Algeria is the home of the most successful annual high-level seminar of Peace and Security Council in Africa, known as the Oran process.
Let's recall that on April 15th, Algeria won a seat on the EU Peace and Security Council for a 3-year term by a landslide, winning more than 2/3 of the votes cast by African countries.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and in Sudan, relief services said that more than 20 civilians were killed and 40 others wounded after a camp sheltering displaced persons near the besieged capital of North Darfur, Al-Fashir, in the western part of the country was bombed for 3 consecutive days by the Rapid Support paramilitary forces. The RSF, since April 2023, has been at war with the Sudanese army and recently intensified attacks on Al-Fashir and nearby displaced people camps. The massive blackout that prompted traffic chaos in the southern European countries is mostly over, while the cause of the outage is still unclear. Large parts of Spain and Portugal, including their capitals Madrid and Lisbon, were hit by power outages yesterday, Monday. Spain declared a state of emergency after the Portuguese and Spanish cabinet convened emergency meetings. Some areas in southern France were also briefly affected. Most of the electricity supply has been restored by Tuesday morning. Portugal's operator Redes Energéticas Nacionais said the country's entire grid was stabilized early today after a mass outage the previous day. And now Canada's governing Liberal Party has secured a national election victory in a campaign overshadowed by U.S. President Donald Trump's escalating trade war and threats of annexation. Prime Minister Mark Carney, who centered his campaign on defending Canada's sovereignty in the face of Trump's provocations, has led the Liberals to a 4th consecutive term and an unexpected political comeback for a party once forecast to suffer a heavy defeat by the Conservatives. Trump has yet to issue the statement on the Liberal victory, which is widely viewed to have been driven by his actions and controversial statements, including his reiterated suggestion on the cusp of the vote that Canada should become the cherished 51st state of the U.S., as he put it. You are listening to Radio Algeria International. That's it for our news bulletin. I invite you now to listen to our health magazine, compiled and presented by Mohammed Khatel.